Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. So today I have a recent reads video for you, but it's actually going to be two recent reads video for you in one. If you've seen some of the videos that I've already posted so far this year, you will know that I got a bit behind with editing at the end of 2021. I had a couple of videos that I'd filmed and didn't have time to edit. One of those was a recent reads video that I filmed kind of in the midpoint of December. I thought it would just be easier to merge these two videos together. So that previous video is covering the end of November and the beginning of December, and so I'm going to insert that in and then carry on with what I read in the rest of December, so it will take you up to the end of 2021. Over to past Kerry to fill you in on what would have been recent reads video 14. I'm going to be talking about 8 books today. I'm mostly going to go through these in the order that I read them, but there will be a couple of shifts in that which I will explain when I get to those books. So the first book I'm going to talk about today is Walhalla by Nikki May. This was a book that I received from NetGalley in exchange for an honest review. It comes out in January. I'm going to be doing a full review of it in time for its release. The short version of the review is that I really loved this book. I gave it 5 stars, didn't have any hesitations giving it 5 stars. It follows 3 friends, Ronka, Simi and Boo, who are all British Nigerian. They all met at university in their late teens, early 20s and bonded over their shared experience of growing up mixed race between Nigeria and England or the UK, and also they all have absent fathers or difficult relationships with their fathers. So they had a lot of shared experiences that bonded them into really close friendship. The book follows them as they are in their early 30s. They all live near each other in London and meet up quite regularly. They're all at quite different stages in their lives. Boo and Simi are both married. Boo has a young daughter. Ronka really wants to get married but keeps having a series of not great boyfriends, which she can't seem to get out of that cycle. Boo is a bit of a frustrated housewife. She really wants to get back into work, but it proves to be a bit more complicated than she expected. And Simi is finally at a point in her career where she feels like she's achieving something, but then realizes that her boss keeps talking about her urban vibe, and she works in fashion and media, and she keeps having to do promotional campaigns for ethnic products, which she starts to realise is being a bit of a trend. None of them are entirely happy with their lives as they are, and then into this mix comes Isabel, who is an old school friend of Simi's. She's recently divorced and has escaped from an abusive marriage. She starts to really shake things up between these 3 friends and seems to be suggesting things that they think will improve their lives, but it's not always obvious that it's actually gonna be an improvement. She really complicates things. This was really interesting. Like, I'm not entirely sure how I'd classify it in terms of genre. Most of it felt like quite a fun contemporary, these 3 friends and how their lives are going, but then there's this kind of slightly sinister element most of the way through that is just not, it's really subtle, but there's kind of this build in tension and drama through the book, and you don't quite know what is going to happen, what's going to come next, how the choices the women make are going to end up impacting on their lives. Then there's quite a dramatic climax, which I really didn't see coming. It was amazing. It was so cleverly done. I loved that book and I gave it 5 stars. The next book that I finished was Scythe by Neil Schusterman. This is the first book in the arc of the Scythe trilogy. I'm doing the read along of this with the Last to Read book club. I had been avoiding these books because they were so hyped when they first came out that I just was really put off by the hype. I'm quite anti-hype. I often find things don't live up to the hype, so I was quite resistant to reading these. I borrowed this one from a friend about a year ago and had just not really got round to picking it up. So when I saw the Last to Read book club were reading it, I was like, okay, I'm going to join in that and I'm going to read along, and I'm so glad I did because I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars in the end. It wasn't quite a perfect book for me, but it was really dramatic. It's kind of a dystopian utopian. So it's set in like what is meant to be a utopian society, but then once you started to examine it, there are lots of cracks, there are lots of things that aren't great. And I really like that kind of take on dystopians. The principle, if you're not familiar, which you probably are, this is a world where humans have conquered death. There's an AI called the Thunderhead who runs things, and humans have the technology to cure all diseases, all illnesses, and can even bring people back from from the point of death. To keep the population under control, the Scythes are tasked with gleaning members of the population, and there's a whole kind of cult that has built up around that. The book follows Citra and Rowan, who are both chosen as apprentices to Scythe Faraday. They're going to be learning how to become Scythes, and at the end of the year, one of them will become a Scythe. And then they are set a challenge that whichever one of them wins then will have to glean the other one, and that just complicates their whole relationship. So there's some really interesting elements, particularly between the different groups within the Scythedom, like the different allegiances that they've got to try and navigate. This book was just full of surprises. I didn't anticipate really anything that happened. I was constantly being surprised by it, constantly on the edge of my seat. We were reading about 4 chapters a day, and I got to about 150 pages left, and I just got to the point where it was just like I had to keep going. Just couldn't put it down. So I ended up finishing a bit quicker than planned because I couldn't wait. So I really enjoyed this, really looking forward to carrying on the series and seeing what happens. And I think I said I gave that one 4 stars. Next, I'm going to talk very quickly about 3 books that I read for uni. So the first one of these was called African Americans Readings of Paul by Lisa Bowens. This we were reading for our postgraduate seminars, so we've been working through the book, and actually our final seminar this week on this book, the author Lisa Bowens is going to be there so we can ask her some questions about it. This was really interesting because she had looked through a couple of 100 years of African American people writing in different forms about faith and theology, and analysed them for all the excerpts that related to the Apostle Paul, who is quite a key figure in the biblical narrative. And she brought them all together and drew out different themes for them. So she started from kind of the 18th century with a number of enslaved African Americans who either acquired freedom during their lifetimes or remained enslaved but had revelations of God. And it was really fascinating. There were a mixture of male and female writers that she was drawing from. And what I found really interesting was that a lot of the feminist theological arguments that everyone thinks are quite recent, actually these African American women in the 18th and 19th centuries were making the same arguments that white feminists started making in the last 100 years or so. That was really eye-opening for me, that a lot of these things that are considered to be quite new arguments aren't really that new at all. And it was really exciting to read all of this stuff from different voices that have kind of been suppressed by history, and to have new insight brought onto texts that are really familiar from voices that have previously been overlooked. So I really enjoyed that, and I was really glad that our postgrad director picked it for us to read, and I gave it 4 stars. And then I've got 2 books that are kind of the primary resources for my research. If you watch my channel regularly, you've probably heard me talk a little bit about this. So I'm looking at evangelical romance retellings of the story of King David, and I finished in the last week or so 2 books called Bathsheba by 2 different authors. But the first one is Bathsheba by Jill Eileen Smith. This is the 3rd book in the Wives of King David series. The series has got progressively better in terms of Jill Eileen Smith's writing. Definitely a better writer by the end of the 3rd book than she was in the 1st book. Lots of problematic elements still though in terms of how this story is portrayed. Lots of really interesting stuff for me to analyse, particularly about the submission of women and gender roles and that sort of thing. Then we've got Bathsheba Reluctant Beauty by Angela Elwell Hunt, and this was quite a different take on the story in one sense because of how she characterises the initial interaction between David and Bathsheba, which for centuries the church has called adultery, but actually she represents it the way I understand it, and actually a lot more people are coming to identify this encounter as non-consensual, as an assault. That was really interesting for me because I wasn't expecting that to come up in one of these books. I was expecting them all to portray this as like this extravagant love story, the brooding king and the beautiful heroine, and it's forbidden love and they overcome all their difficulties. And so to have it actually presented how I think it should be, as essentially rape, as a sexual assault, it actually really took me aback. I was kind of a bit like, I didn't know what to do with it. And then to see how the story develops, how she develops the story to then make it still kind of into a love story, is problematic in its own way. So I don't really know how I feel about this book because it just raised a lot more questions for me about how we understand Bathsheba's story, which is kind of why I'm doing the research. So yeah, really, really fascinating. So I ended up giving both of these 3 stars. This one edges it out as being slightly better, but I didn't feel comfortable giving it more than 3 stars until I've thought about it a bit more. So I will be rereading these and annotating them loads and analysing them, and I've got to do some work this week just doing an initial write-up of all my thoughts about all of the books. I've just got one. I'm rereading a novella that I haven't read for many years about the same story. Hopefully in the next couple of days I'll have kind of my initial analysis, the first part of my research project. Still don't know that I would recommend any of them. Ask me again in 3 years. Back into sequence. The next book that I'm going to talk about today is Alexander Hamilton by Ron Chernow. This is the epic biography of Alexander Hamilton, upon which the musical is based. So I picked this up because I'm a big fan of the musical. I have yet to see it on stage, but I have watched it on Disney Plus numerous times and have had the soundtrack playing more or less on repeat for the last couple of months because I really, really love it. So I thought it might be fun to pick up the actual book that inspired the musical, and it was really, really interesting. It was hard work to get through. It's about 800 pages and there was a lot of detail in there. But what I found really interesting was to see all the elements that they'd adapted for the musical to make things more dramatic or more interesting. They changed up the timeline in a couple of places. They had to exclude some characters, and so they had to kind of redefine who does what in certain places, try and keep to a reasonable sized cast. But this was really, really fascinating. I don't know a lot about American history. It was a really interesting insight for me into the actual history of the founding of the United States and the Revolutionary War, rather than just the pseudo history that the musical represents. But it was really, really good. So if you like history, if you are a fan of the musical, I do encourage you to give it a go, just to see what the actual history behind the story of the musical is. My favourite fact that I found out was that actually Eliza was the only one of the Schuyler sisters that didn't elope. All of her other sisters eloped, which I thought was really fun. She had more than just 2 sisters, and she did have some brothers as well. There were several things like Angelica was already married by the time Alexander met her, so she was never an option for him to marry. It was only ever Eliza. Just little things like that they changed up to make the musical more interesting, more dramatic, but it's really fun to learn the history behind it. So that was that one. I gave that one 4 stars. Then I read God Help the Child by Toni Morrison, so I had this one out from the library as well. This was my first time reading a Toni Morrison book and I really enjoyed it. I thought the writing was really, really beautiful. This was quite short. It was less than 200 pages, and actually while I really enjoyed it, I could have gone on reading it. I would have been happy for it to be at least twice as long. So that's a really good sign for me, and definitely would encourage me to pick up more Toni Morrison books. So this followed Bride. It was told from multiple perspectives, Bride being one of them. Her mother, whose name I can't remember, was another one. The first chapter is told from her mother's perspective about how she and her husband were mixed race but relatively light-skinned, and then when Bride was born she was really quite dark-skinned, and how that affected the mother's life and her marriage, and how that affected how she related to her child. And then it kind of jumps forward to when Bride is in her 20s and her reflecting back on her life. She's recently broke up from her first really serious relationship, and so it's her reaction to that and figuring out some stuff from her past that maybe she regrets. It was all woven together really cleverly, and there was kind of an interesting element of part of Bride's reaction to this breakup is that she feels like she's regressing back to childhood. So she notices all these physical changes in her body, but it's never entirely clear whether it's only her that's noticing these things or whether it's evident to everyone else that these physical changes are occurring. I thought it was just really, really cleverly done. Yeah, I would happily read more from Toni Morrison, and we'll be looking out more books by her next year. Really glad to have read my first Toni Morrison and really looking forward to reading more stuff by her. I gave this one 4 stars. And then the final book that I'm going to talk about today is a short story anthology called Once Upon a Winter. This was edited by H.L. McFarlane and is a collection of speculative fiction based around folk and fairy tales, and all set around the theme of winter. I'm not going to talk about it loads now because I've got a review for that and another anthology which I think you'll have seen before you see this, so I'll link that in the description box for you so you can go and check out more of my thoughts on this. But I thought this was a really solid anthology. I really enjoyed it. Most of the stories in it I really, really enjoyed. There were a couple that I didn't like quite so much that drifted slightly more into the horror genre than in the more kind of fantasy fantasy, urban fantasy that most of them were. I'm not a big fan of horror, it's just not for me. I just don't like being scared. Yeah, there were a couple of stories that I kind of would class more as horror that just made me kind of uncomfortable and weren't quite the cozy stories that I was looking for from a wintry anthology. But the majority of the stories I really, really enjoyed. There were a couple of really, really good highlights for me. So if you want to know more of my thoughts on that, go and check out that review, which will be in the description box for you. And I gave that anthology 4 stars. And now on to what would have been recent reads video 15. So this is what I read in the second half of December. Actually, the first thing I'm going to talk about kind of covers the beginning and end of December, really, because I finally finished Les Miserables. So I finished 2 volumes in French and then the whole thing in English. Volume 4, which is L'Idylle de la Rue Plumet, and volume 5, which is Jean Valjean. So I read those both in French. I finished volume 4 in the middle of December and I finished volume 5 at the end of December, and then also finished the whole thing in English. I'm not going to talk loads about it because you've already heard me talk about it quite a lot as I've been reading it. The whole thing took me 6 months. I probably could have got through it quicker if I'd read it more consistently, but actually some of the French was a lot harder than I knew it was going to be hard, but particularly some parts of the book where Victor Hugo goes off on these long rambling essays about aspects of Parisian life. Like there's a massive diversion about Waterloo, there's a shorter diversion about the Paris sewer system, there's a diversion about monasteries and nunneries and what he thinks of them. And so it was actually in places quite hard to get into a rhythm. I really enjoyed the narrative, and I actually found in the more narrative sections I understood the French better, but I think at least a certain part of that was because I was reading them a bit more regularly. And certainly by the end, in December, I was reading 30 pages a day in French. Not quite consistently every day, and it varied a little bit, but on average. So that meant by the end of that, actually my brain was getting better at reading the French and understanding it and getting more familiar with the language again. Yeah, so the goal is to do the same again. I have a number of other French books, or I have a kind of a mixture. Some of them I have the ebooks in French and I have the physical books in English, or vice versa. So I'm going to try and do this parallel reading. I also have some more modern books that would be easier just to read in French. So I'm going to mix it up a bit over this year and read a mixture of parallel reading the book in French and in English, or just reading the book in French depending on when it was written and that sort of thing. But it was a really good exercise for me, and I was actually really pleased with how much I understood of the French, because it's been quite a long time since I did my French degree and since I lived in France, and so I don't use the French very much anymore. So it was really encouraging to do that experiment. Yeah, really enjoyable book. I'm really excited to rewatch the film musical. I can't remember when it came out, but I have it on DVD, so I'm going to rewatch that soon. I also haven't yet watched the BBC miniseries that came out a couple of years ago, so I've got that recorded, so I'm going to watch that too. And I'm probably actually going to download the soundtrack soon, because I really love that soundtrack and I don't own it yet. Overall, I gave the whole thing 4 stars. Most of the individual volumes I gave 4 stars. I think one of them I gave 5 stars, the last one, because it had a lot more narrative and I was really much more into it by then. So that is one book from the middle of December and 2 books from the end of December, but they were all the same book, so I've done them all together. The next book I'm going to talk about today was Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. This was my first time reading pure Sanderson. I read the Wheel of Time series a few years ago, which Brandon Sanderson finished off because Robert Jordan died before he could finish writing them. So I'd read Sanderson writing as Robert Jordan essentially, but I'd not read anything that was just Brandon Sanderson, and my friends have been on at me to start reading him for a while. So I eventually was persuaded to get Elantris out of the library. There was a bit of discussion between my friends about whether I should start with Elantris or start somewhere else. So I did also, I have a copy of The Final Empire, but because Elantris was from the library, I needed to take it back, and that was what eventually made me start reading it, because I'd had it out for ages and wasn't going to be able to renew it anymore. So I finally read Elantris. I gave it 5 stars. I really, really enjoyed it. I talked a bit about it in my December wrap up. I chose it as my favourite book I read in December, so I'm not going to talk about it loads now. It was really good fantasy. I really enjoyed the magic system, the world building. I was a bit disappointed that at the moment there's nothing else written set in this world. I think there's maybe a short story, but I have heard that he's planning to write more books set in this world, so I'm quite excited. I would read more about these characters. I really enjoyed the characters. And yeah, I'm now definitely looking forward to reading more Brandon Sanderson. I'm gonna try and get to the Final Empire in 2022. I'm not definitely sure because I've got other authors I want to focus on, but it's definitely on my radar to try and get to it in 2022. So we'll see how I get on with that. I'm not gonna say much more about it than that because I talked about it a lot in that other video, and like for me, I've literally just said it. For you, it'll probably be a bit of a gap between watching it, but yeah, that's how it goes sometimes. Yeah, gave it 5 stars. Looking forward to reading more Sanderson, and sorry friends that it took me so long. The next book that I finished was Letters to a Diminished Church by Dorothy L. Sayers. I gave this 4 stars. It was my first time reading anything by Dorothy L. Sayers and I really enjoyed it. It would have been 5 stars, only there were actually issues with this particular edition. So this is a collection of her essays, which I think were assembled specifically for this book. This book was first published in like 2000 and something, 2004 maybe? Yeah, 2004. And they just brought a load of her works together. But to me, it wasn't very well done because what they should have done was like given the context of when these were written. I think they were trying to make it feel like one flowing argument through the whole book. There were elements of that worked, but actually even it just needed some footnotes to say this essay was first written, was first published in this year, you know, and give that context. I think it's because I'm an academic. I wanted it to be a bit more robust academically. And then the other thing that bothered me was there's some places where she quotes in other languages and it didn't give the translation, and I'm like, maybe when she was writing them you could assume that all the people reading it would understand like German or would have the text on hand, but to me it was lazy. It was a bit lazily put together. Dorothy herself would easily have got 5 stars, but the editors of the edition didn't do their due diligence as far as I'm concerned to make this an accessible book for the everyday reader who it is aimed at. It's not aimed at an academic audience, so it needed to have that little bit of extra work in it to make it more accessible. But it was very interesting. It was really great to read and understand a bit more of Dorothy L. Sayers' theology. I know that she was good friends with the Inklings, particularly C.S. Lewis, so it was good to see her perspective on some of the things that he writes about in his theology work. So I very much enjoyed reading this and looking forward to reading more of her books. I particularly would like to start reading some of her fiction. I don't know how soon I'll be able to do that because I don't own any of it, so I'd have to buy it at some point or see what I can get from the library. But yeah, I definitely want to read more from Dorothy L. Sayers in the future. The next book that I finished was Tokyo Ever After by Emiko Jean. I had this out as a ebook from the library. This was really sweet. It's YA contemporary. It's about a young Japanese American woman. She's been brought up by her mother, a single mother, and she's never known who her father was. Her mother's never really talked that much about him. And then one day by accident, she stumbles across a book that her father gave her mother, and she and her friend then do a bit of digging and they find out that her father is actually the Crown Prince of Japan. And so it starts off this whole journey of her like trying to arrange to meet her father and learn more about her Japanese heritage, and gets into lots of scrapes as the new Japanese princess. And it was sweet and it was funny. Really enjoyed it. It was very lovely, and there's more books coming in the series, so I'm looking forward to reading them in the future. This was the second Emiko Jean book I read, but the first contemporary, so her other book was a YA fantasy, but again very much inspired by Japanese culture, so it's really interesting to see the difference in the writing between the different genres. She's good at both. I enjoyed both of these books very much. There was quite a sweet romance, which when I first suspected who the love interest was, I was a little bit like, really? But actually it kind of worked and I kind of quite liked it by the end. The way the relationship between the protagonist's parents develops was also really lovely, and just the dynamics of how she tries to find her way in this new family. She's gone from having just a parent to suddenly a massive extended family, and she's got to find her way across that. And I just thought it was really clever, really sweet, really enjoyed it. So I gave it 4 stars. The next book that I finished was Stay Another Day by Juno Dawson. So this was the book I nominated as a optional group book for the Christmas readathon. I'd read one of Juno Dawson's YA contemporaries during last year. This was my first time reading one of her adult books. I don't think I'd realised it was actually for an adult audience, whereas the previous one was for a YA audience. The library's categorized it as teen plus, but I would say like the protagonists in this are around either late teens or early 20s. I can't remember exactly. The younger sibling is like I think about 16 or 17, and the older ones I think are 19 or 20. They're all at university, so I don't know, just some of the themes and some of the content I would say would push this up into adult in my opinion, rather than young adult. Would not be expecting younger teenagers to be reading this. Personally, wouldn't want to be book police. And I know I certainly read stuff as a young teenager that was probably too old for me, or some would say was too old for me. But yeah, I'd be steering this towards older, like university age and up, I think would be the comfortable audience for this. If new adult was the thing that we hoped it would be, then this would definitely be new adult. Anyway, enough about categorising it. This was another contemporary. It's very Christmassy, so it's set over the Christmas period, so it starts I think on the 22nd of December through to the 28th. It follows a family called the McAllisters, which I think is a hat tip to Home Alone, but I can't be sure of that. So the three siblings are going to be united at Christmas together for the first time in a couple of years. The siblings are a set of twins called Rowan and Fern. Fern is a bit of a control freak and she's bringing her boyfriend home to meet her family for the first time, so it's a bit intense for her. Rowan, her brother, is a drama student. He's very gay and is kind of enjoying quite a hedonistic lifestyle and is kind of complete other end of the spectrum to Fern, but because they're twins they have like a real strong bond. And their younger sister Willow is recovering from an eating disorder, and so Christmas is filled with a whole lot of extra drama and tension for her because there's a lot of food and a lot of pressure and a lot of expectation, and she's still dealing with a lot of issues to do with food. So it's a really interesting dynamic. The strapline on it is 4 sleeps till Christmas, 3 siblings, 1 big secret. There's actually multiple big secrets, I thought, in this, and the way it's all put together I thought was really cleverly done. I ended up giving it 3 stars because most of the time I was mostly annoyed with most of the characters. Rowan and Fern, I didn't like them for most of the book. By the end of it, I'd warmed to them a little bit, but just some of the things that they do and some of the choices they make really bothered me. Just in the way they interacted with each other and with their family. For the supposedly older, more mature siblings, they were just a bit bratty in places and wound me up a lot. Willow, I loved. I mean, she has her bratty moments as well, but in the context of what she's been through, it's much more understandable. So she was kind of the reason I kept reading, was I wanted to know more about Willow and how she was going to cope. She was kind of the more minor of the 3 main characters though, which was a bit annoying for me. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. There was a lot of content in this that might be triggering. It does have a content warning at the beginning of the book. I haven't been given content warnings for any of these books, but I will be linking in the description to the Book Trigger Warnings website so you can check out if any of these books are safe for you to read. It's better that I do it that way because I will not remember all the content and I probably haven't picked up on some things that some people will find triggering. That site is Community Wiki. It's more likely to have the content that people will find triggering mentioned on that site. So do go and check out the links in the description box if you want to check if any of these books are safe for you to read. It also recommends Storygraph as a good reading tracking website, which has the ability to give content warnings embedded in adding your reviews to the site. So I found that really helpful for me as a reader as well as a reviewer. So yeah, I gave that one 3 stars. Really enjoyable. I would read more from Juno Dawson. Didn't enjoy it quite as much as the YA book that I read from her in the summer, so I would maybe personally stick to her more YA stuff just because I personally don't enjoy a lot of smut in books. It just makes me uncomfortable. I'm on the A spectrum, so it doesn't work for me. It might be fine for other people on the A spectrum, but for me it's like I don't like it. And there was a bit more swearing also than I'm entirely comfortable with in books, but that is just my personal preference, and for other people they will really, really love this book. So the next book that I finished, I'm only going to talk about very briefly, was Miss Marley by Vanessa LaFay. This was a novella. It's designed to be a prequel to A Christmas Carol, and I mean there was lots of nice stuff in this. I really liked the imagination of Jacob Marley having a sister and how their relationship shaped him. I don't know why, well I think it's because it's got this tagline of a seasonal tale of kindness and goodwill. I thought it would be happier, but bearing in mind what A Christmas Carol is about and the fact that this is a prequel to it, and we know that A Christmas Carol starts with Jacob Marley's death and that he doesn't ever have the redemption, this wasn't going to end happily. I just hoped that it would. Well, I think I hoped at least that Clara, the Miss Marley character, would have a happier experience than she ended up having in this book. So you want feel-good Christmas vibes. It doesn't quite hit the mark, so I ended up giving it 3 stars. It was quite enjoyable. I do want to read Vanessa LaFay's other books. She died partway through writing this and it was finished by another author, one of her friends. She'd only published a couple of books before her death, but but I am intrigued to read them because I did enjoy her writing style. I just didn't think this quite worked for what the goal was of being like a nice, happy, Christmassy story. It didn't quite hit the mark for me, but still enjoyed it enough. So that was 3 stars. Next, I finished the Raven Stratagem by Walhalla. This is the second book in the Machineries of Empire series. It is a sequel to Nine Fox Gambit. I absolutely loved this. I'm not going to talk a lot about it because it is a sequel. This series is like complex, complicated, confusing sci-fi. It's set in an empire that runs very strictly on doctrine. So for all of the, well, essentially the machineries of empire, that's where the series title comes from. For all of their technology and that to work, it relies on a very strict calendar and of people observing certain festivals and believing certain things, mostly to do with the empire being great. The first book follows a character called Cheris, who is instructed to attack a heretical colony which threatens the existence of the empire, and to do that she teams up with an undead general called Jadao. He kind of becomes like this voice in her head, and this book picks up where the first book ended, but it follows different characters and kind of elaborates on the story. So Cheris and Jadao still feature in this book. It was not from their perspective in the same way. So I really loved this. I loved the wider exploration of the universe of the books. The world building is just so good. There was a bit more explanation of how some of the technology works, and there was a bit of a deeper dig into some of the inconsistencies and some of the issues with the system. I really loved this. I read it quite quickly. I'm so excited to finish the series. I've got the third book on request from the library, so I'm hopefully going to be able to pick it up soon. Really loved this. Walhalla, I think, is going to become a favourite author. Just really keen to carry on reading his work. So I had no hesitations giving this 5 stars, and I can't wait to finish the series. The next book that I finished was Dead Aid by Dambisa Moyo. This is non-fiction. It's about economics. It's about how the specifically Western policy of giving a lot of money and aid to Africa isn't working and why it isn't working. It was focused more on governmental aid than other forms of aid like charitable giving and that sort of thing. She addresses why she doesn't think giving aid works as a system and proposes some alternatives that African countries could use. So this was written about 10 years ago now. I don't know a lot about economics. I came across this from another book that I'd read called Toxic Charity, which I read in the summer, which referenced this in places. This was a better book than that one and gave me a better understanding of some of the issues with aid, and certainly has made me think more about how we go about giving money to people in need. I don't think necessarily I agree with everything she said, but she did present a really convincing argument, and it's given me a better understanding of some of the issues around aid that I wasn't aware of. So I found it a really interesting read. I don't know a lot about economics. Some of it went a bit over my head, but yeah, there was a lot of interesting stuff to think about in this. It also counted for Read Around the World, which was helpful as the author is from Zambia. So I gave that one 4 stars in the end. It was kind of 3.5, but yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting. I've already talked about Les Miserables, so I've just got one more book to talk about today, which is Thunderhead by Neil Schusterman. So this was the last book I finished in 2021. I finished it at 11 o'clock on the 31st of December in the evening, and I just kind of had read it constantly most of the evening. I didn't have any like proper New Year's Eve plans. I just wanted to finish this. So this is the second book in the Arc of a Scythe series. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail about this book specifically because it's a sequel. There's a lot of drama, and this book just amped up the drama even more. Introduced us some new characters that I quite liked, specifically a character called Grayson I thought was a really fascinating and interesting character, and I really liked that. The emotional levels and the drama really amped up in this book, but also the humour as well. I found this one much funnier than the first one, and there was just, yeah, a lot to enjoy. So I'd given the first one 4 stars. I gave this one 5 stars actually because I enjoyed it more. I found it more entertaining. I found it more tense and more dramatic, and there was a lot that I really enjoyed about it. So I'm really excited to finish this series as well. I already have the third one out from the library of this, and I'm looking forward to reading it soon. Well done if you've made it this far. You've just sat through me talking about a lot of books over 2 separate videos that I've merged into one. Hopefully it won't take too long to edit and will not be quite as long as I'm worried it's going to be. We will see. So let me know if you've read any of the books I've talked about and what you thought of them. Let me know some of what you've been reading recently and what you've enjoyed particularly. Or if you just want to let me know that you've been here, leave me a bird emoji for the Raven Stratagem, because that was one of my favourite books that I read that I've talked about today. If you can find a raven emoji, go for a raven, but just a like a bird emoji would be great. If you just want to let me know that you've been here and can't think of anything specific to say. You can also like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you haven't already. And you can also follow me on my social media. All that information is listed for you in the description box below. But that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!